And I thought, well, no matter what we do, we'll keep enough money and to buy plane tickets to come home. And I'm not going to be one of these people sitting in the chair when I'm 80 years of age regretting that I didn't do what I thought was a really good idea at the time. And we did a lot of budgeting and financial work, and we travelled like 5 times. I think we travelled out before we actually made our mind up that this was definitely what we're going to do.
I'm joined this week by Fermanagh man Rodney Elliott, who is farming in the US state of South Dakota. In the first of a 2-part interview series, Rodney outlines how he went from farming 140 dairy cows in Maguiresbridge, County Fermanagh, to operating 2 large-scale dairy units in the US. He outlines how the business has grown over time, some of the challenges met along the way and how they have overcome them. And Rodney discusses what farming KPIs matter in the running of his business and how he manages costs and market volatility. I started by asking Rodney to tell us about himself and his initial journey into dairy farming.
Of course, Drumgoon comes from our home farm in Maguiresbridge. And I was one of these young fellas that knew everything I needed to know when I was 15, couldn't wait to get away from school. Came home from school to my father's suckler cow farm, 70 suckler cows. And it took me about a year to realise that I wasn't a real financial benefit to the farm, and we needed to do something different to support 2 family incomes or 2 incomes. And I pleaded with my father to go into the dairy farming business, and he didn't want that idea. And but eventually he took a leap of faith, and him and my mother gifted me 27 acres of land free and clear when I was still only like 17. And I started milking 25 cows in 1982. And the next 22 years, I struggled up to 140 cows in Ireland. So that's where we started back in Maguiresbridge. I suppose then the frustrations of a few bad years and lack of opportunity to expand and maybe a midlife crisis, whatever it was, James, I decided to look further afield and ended up out here in America.
And was there anything, I suppose, specific? You said a couple of bad years, but what year are we talking about there? And I suppose, how did you end up looking at, you're in South Dakota now, obviously. How did you maybe end up deciding on South Dakota?
I suppose, like everyone else, I looked at farms for sale in Scotland and listened to a few people who'd gone to New Zealand. And my wife and I travelled a little bit. We were in France, and that looked really nice lifestyle there. You know, you saw the big fancy farms in England that were, you know, better weather or whatever, you know. But how I ended up in the US is state of South Dakota realised they needed dairy farmers. They realised their dairy industry was dying, and they thought that their local farmers were never going to fill that need. And they looked abroad. A lot of Dutch guys came over, some English people come over, some Canadians come down. And I went on a trip here in April of 2004, came out and saw what was going on, and realised that while we were had lots of equity back in our farm in Ireland, we were cash poor, and like lots of farmers are, and that's part of the life, and realised that we could take that equity and put it to better use back out here. So, and we ended up being out here. We'll be here 20 years now in February.
Maybe take us through that process, because I'm sure there's lots of people, and there'll be even lots of our listeners that maybe thought about moving elsewhere or farming abroad and whatever country that may be. But it's one thing thinking, Rodney, and it's another thing doing as such. So take us through maybe that process and how it went from the thought, the visit in 2004 to actually up sticks and moving to South Dakota.
You know, I was in a different position than a lot of people. Remember, I was 40 when I came out here in 2004. So, 42 when I moved. Unfortunately, my father had died 5 years before that, and the farm was all mine. My wife was a US citizen, so that actually made life a little easier for the immigration. And I'd been my own boss for 25 years. You know, I had run my own business, always had bought and sold land, and had made plenty of mistakes along the way. So maybe confidence in my own ability or overconfidence in my own ability. And I suppose it's a time of life that my 3 children were old enough to remember where they were from, maybe young enough to adapt. And I thought, well, no matter what we do, we'll keep enough money and to buy plane tickets to come home. And I'm not going to be one of these people sitting in the chair when I'm 80 years of age, regretting that I didn't do what I thought was a really good idea at the time. And we did a lot of budgeting and financial work, and we traveled like 5 times. I think we traveled out before we actually made our mind up that this is definitely what we're going to do. You know.
And to the point in terms of, I suppose, buying the site where you set up, maybe just talk our listeners through what did you actually start with in Drumgoon when you moved out?
Well, actually, I didn't come out to buy it. I'd had some issues with U.S. immigration and I had to wait for my U.S. green card to get here. My wife flew out. We saw an listing back then. The internet wasn't nearly as grand as it is today, and a site for sale. We had already bought a house in one of our trips out here, and she came out. She saw the site. She put in a bid. We bought the site. 160 acres, just a bare field, and location wise, it was good. Uh, and then that set off the process. So I actually didn't see the site where we milk cows today until I arrived out here in the February of '06. And I sure hope my wife had made a good decision, and she had. Mhm.
And at point you landed in February '06, Rodney. When did you start milking? At what scale? Talk us maybe through that process. Even how do you get a milk buyer? What way does that work?
Well, of course, the dairy industry needed people like ourselves back then. So the milk buyer was the easy part. They were there in place before we bought, as soon as we bought the site. We had a group of people, two Dutch guys that were building dairies. So they did a lot of the design, a lot of the planning and stuff like that there. Of course, they knew the people. We didn't. Uh, Construction started, our ground freezes maybe 6 feet deep, 5 feet deep. So construction didn't start till the frost come out of the ground in May, and we started building in May and milked our first cows on the 22nd, 21st, 22nd of December in 2006. So that was 6 months building. And we started off, obviously, I think day one was 200 and 300 cows. We had a small farm rented for cows that were milking at that stage. We got to 1,400 cows within the first 6, 7 months. Mhm. So that was the plan, was to milk 1,400 cows there.
Is that what the original barn, original parlour, the original setup was designed for, Rodney? Yeah.
It was actually permit and designed for 2,000 cows, and we expanded it in 2008 to meet that 2,000 cow goal. So that was probably phase one of our expansion process.
Yeah, we might talk through some of them. What were the main challenges, I suppose, uh, those initial kind of 12, 18 months? Like capital must have been, was it difficult? I know they wanted dairy farmers, but it's one thing wanting them, and I suppose it's another thing backing them. How did that whole process work?
So I've told this story many times. We had 4 or 5 months when we came out here. We'd no affiliation to any banks. There's 1,400 banks in the US, and so lots and lots of options. We went and we brought a business plan which we'd put together to 5 or 6 different banks, 4 or 5 banks for sure, and that business plan was actually 900 cows. And eventually, we've met some other dairy farmers, a family that had been dairying in Canada and had come down, and they said, "You got to go see our banker." So we had time. The kids were in school. Dorothy and I had some time. This would have been the March, April of 2006. We were going to build, and we just were going to see what was going on. And we went to see their banker, and he was the first one who refused us, you know. And honestly, James, I've forgotten the numbers, but in round numbers, we were asking other banks to loan us 1.5 million, and he was the first one who said, "No, I won't give you $1.5 million of a loan. Uh, I'll give you $3 million because you're not thinking you've enough equity to get to 1,400 cows. You need to think bigger." And that was very pivotal. That maybe was what got us on the track to because we were profitable from 2007. It was a good year, and we made a good little bit of money.
Mm. But you went, I suppose, I think I heard you said this before, Rodney. You went from 140 cows in County Fermanagh to what you thought was large scale dairy farming in the US at 1,400 cows, and all of a sudden you have people telling you that you weren't thinking big enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a huge challenge too, because I assumed that all I had to do, and that's a mistake lots of people make, was work harder and I could do all the things myself. I wanted to breed all the cows myself. I wanted to be in charge of the feeding. I wanted to be making sure that the cows got milked right and the cows got calved right and the bits and pieces. And so then you were starting off in the cold winter here, probably a little stress from the whole startup, bringing in new cattle, new people, all that. We weren't milking 24/7 then. We were milking three shifts and trying to get 2, 3 hours, 4 hours off in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night. And so, no, the hours become ridiculous. The stress can become ridiculous. And I just realized after about 2, 3 months, I can't do this. This is just not going to work. There was no family life. There was no nothing. Uh, and then you just got to put your trust in people and let them get on with it.
And we'll come to maybe the whole people management side of things. Take us through then. That's '06. That's an initial point. The 1,400 cows. Take us through. You said that you're next year you'll be there 20 years. Take us through that process and that growth process, and maybe finish off with where you are at today from a farming business perspective.
Yeah, well, there's been several steps along the line. I think when you look back, almost every year we've built something. So, 06, 1,400, '08, we got to the 2,000 cows. Initially, we had been using outside raisers to raise our calves and our young stock. Started taking control of some of them as early as 2010. Grew that end of it as we expanded and grew cows. Um, Got to the point where in 2012 we had 2,000 milking cows, and dry cows were all housed in outside yards, which works great spring and fall, works horribly winter and summer. So realized we needed to do something else. Had a lot of pregnant heifers, good relationship with our bank. So we built the second dairy on the site, Norden Barn, which was built for 1,100 cows in 2013. That was always built with the view to expand it to 2,700 cows. That was done again, a super year. 2014 was a brilliant year to milk cows. We cash flowed and built that second part of the expansion in 2015. Got us to that had got us to 4,000 cows ish. Maybe a few more. And then that was where we kind of got into, I don't say some problems, but we become very, very fragmented. We had 4,000 cows, 4,500 cows. We had young stock everywhere. We had young stock uh, in 8 or 9 different places. We were renting farms. We were having people raise some heifers from calves for us. We had built some facilities for heifers. We had another farm that we had our calves at. Lots of problems going on there. Our bank advised us then to go and look at some other operations that had moved their young stocks further south. And so we sent down a bunch of heifers into Kansas, allowed us to take dry cows and move them into some of the facilities that we had for heifers and roof those, and then moved our dry cows out of the barns and got us to 5,000 cows. And then we decided to invest in a big facility in southwest Kansas. We become one of the partners in Kansas Dairy Development, and we sent all our calves down into southwest Kansas and kept our heifers there till they were 5 months pregnant. Closed down most of those places that we were renting.
So that's really your contract rearing facility. That's obviously
We have a large ownership in it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I sit on the board of directors down there, and that has been great because now as we keep adding cows and we continue to add cows, we just send more calves down every week down there, and that facility has grown unbelievable. I think we have 106,000 head of cattle on that site today. I say I was down there last week for the annual meeting, And we're expanding again. We're going to 140,000. And we do calves for 71 different farms from all over the US down there. And that's been a big part of our development down there. It's been an interesting project because it was one of those startup businesses as a partner that we had to feed with some money and some stress and some issues, and we lost some partners along the way. But those of us who stuck with it have seen it to become very successful. We then built our robot barn in 2020. Had another 1,600 cows there, so 6,500 cows. And then got an opportunity. Our milk buyers wanted more milk, wanted to build again, and ended up partnering up with the Czech family. And we built County Line Dairy in 2024. Well, 23, 24, opened it up. It's a year open now on the 26th of December, the day after Christmas. And that's 5,000 cows up at County Line. Again, we're 50-50 partners with another family up there. And that's going very well. We had our staff party up there last night up there for the staff up there, and a good manager up there, good relationships. But I was very involved in that because I was the general contractor that built it, designed it, put it all together and got it stocked up with cows. And that's been a kind of a 3-year process. And so that's where we are today. 7,000 odd cows on Drumgoon. It's 5,000 cows up on County Line, all the young stock mostly down in Kansas. Grew our farmland quite a bit along the way. There was opportunity to buy land. We bought land.
There's obviously been a period across those 20 years. There's been rapid growth, and there's been consistent growth. You could say, how did you balance, we'll say, growth aspirations while also managing maybe farm efficiency? And you mentioned it there. There was probably a bumpy period there where there needed to be a wee bit of alignment that you mentioned, and moving heifers off and streamlining the thing. But how do you get that balance working at such scale and with so many people?
I think one of the things you've got to do, James, is, and we've done it long way, you've got to admit when you've made mistakes, you know? And sometimes admitting you've made mistakes is, I've just got to walk away from that investment of whatever it was, you know? So like, we took on to raise our own calves out of desperation because the guy that was raising our calves was losing 17% of them, right? And of course, this was 2010. We built the state-of-the-art calf raising machines, ventilation, heated floors, you name it. We spent money on this thing. And we struggled for 6 years. And yeah, our death loss wasn't 17%, but it probably was 10 at times, you know. Uh, our calf performance wasn't good, and our calves were getting pneumonia. And then we went to calf hutches, and calf hutches are great. But when it's minus 25 outside, you lose calves out there. There was a day back in 2017, 18, 17, yeah. We lost 36 calves in a day. It got down to minus 36, you know. And then you lose people because people just don't like that work, and I don't blame them, you know. You can't. We were feeding calves at 3 o'clock in the morning because it was warmer at 3 o'clock in the morning than it was at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we were feeding 3 times a day, and you know it was just tough work. So we walked away from all that investment, you know, and some of it sits empty today, you know. Uh, Obviously, we were fit to sell calf hutches down to Kansas and so on and so forth. Other times, like now, I suppose it was every seat of farmlets, we're walking away from robots. You know, we spent $12 million building a beautiful robot barn, turned thousands of people through that because it was the barn to see, and just realized that we ain't making no money milking cows with robots. It's costing us too much money. It's our staff aren't enjoying it, so on and so forth. So it's time to change that. And so we've done other things too. Rented some land that just didn't work out. We weren't making any money on it, so we just got out of that and walked away from it. You know, even from staff point of view, we've hired what we think are really the right people, and 3-4 months in, we realized this isn't working out, and I can't see it ever getting any better, and it's time to to cut your losses, I suppose is what I'm saying, right?
So it's identifying those mistakes, and I suppose as early as you can putting them right, Rodney. It's often when you do something and you put your heart and soul and you put a lot of effort into it, it is hard to roll back from it, isn't it?
And always remember, when you're pointing your finger, there's three pointing back at you, and admitting your mistakes. And I think that's something we've done more often than I mentioned there, but it's been very important to admit that you're wrong. So
Maybe, and I haven't, and maybe I should have earlier outlined the system you are actually operating for some listeners. Some
oh yeah.
people, as you say, will be aware, but it's obviously a fully enclosed system. It's all year round calving, just type of cows, just briefly, and we might get into some of it a little bit later on in the interview.
Yeah, a little bit different from Drumgoon and County Line, but Drumgoon first. We're milking a lot of crossbred cows. We milk 24/7. Cows are confined all the time, milking 3 times a day, feeding high quality feed, corn silage, alfalfa haylage, some cocktail mixes and stuff like that there. But again, access to cheap corn, cheap soybean meal, cheap distillers products, because we're surrounded by good feed. Probably farm our own land, and again, we get that all custom done. That produces 30%, 35% of our feed needs. The rest all purchased from local crop farmers, because we need massive amounts of feed. Mostly all Hispanic staff uh, on the farm, from Mexico, Guatemala, so on and so forth. Um, and all AI bred calves leave the farm at 2, 3 days of age and come back 5, 6 months pregnant.
Mm.
Those sort of things. Farm in a climate that will see temperatures everywhere from -30 to +40. So very much true continental seasonal climate. Uh, and yeah, family farm with my wife, my son, and myself, a couple of really good managers helping us run a business that uh, has become a little bit of a monster at times.
It's still very much, though, when I had the privilege to visit, I suppose it's still very much a family farm. It's a family run business. And we'll touch on those things. It's just maybe to give our listeners a flavour. But as we go on through part two of this interview, we will touch on some of those things in terms of breeding, nutrition, and so on. One thing in terms of the growing of the business before I leave it, and lots of our listeners will be wondering on this perspective, from an environmental perspective, what are the requirements? And, do they have an impact in terms of growing the business? Because we've obviously seen that rapid growth, but you remember what it was like back home as such in terms of what's your environmental requirements?
Yeah, well, I think we have environmental requirements that are very sensible. So, for example, the sites must be built on an impervious soil. They're a total containment site, so all waste stays contained on the site, and they're very adamant about that. So we do soil borings, and we have to be on like 100 feet deep of impermeable clay, right? Because our manure-based ponds are all clay-based ponds, right? And then everything, has to drain to those ponds, right? From the manure application point of view, uh, we put most of our manure out after harvest time onto the corn silage stubble, onto soybean stubble, or whatever, right? And so everything has to be soil sampled. If it's over a shallow aquifer, we have to soil sample down 4 feet deep. If it's not, it's 2 feet deep soil samples. We employ a company to do all that for us. And then we match the application of manure to the requirements of the next year's crop and to what that soil says it can take. So we'll see variable rates of manure because of phosphorus loads and so on and so forth. And then we also have to farm around that. So that some of the land closest to there gets very high phosphorus loads, we and potassium, and we end up growing a lot of rye, winter rye, and cover crop, and changing rotations of crops to clean that soil up, shall we say, right?
Mm.
Uh, Also rules like we can't apply manure within 30 feet of 35 feet or whatever of a running water, even though the water's not running at that time. It's all GPSed out, and obviously not applying any manure on frozen ground. So we have a closed period when the ground freezes, we're closed, and those sort of things. And that all has to be recorded, all has to be tracked. So, like, we have a manure management plan on Drumgoon, which includes a lot of land that we don't own, obviously, that neighbours want us to spread manure in it. And that's 13,000 acres of land. Remember, there's no other livestock in the area. It's all arable land. So there's lots of people looking for manure. It's just, can we get it there cost effectively? And the manure is not applied, surface applied. It's all injected into the ground, right? It's all recorded.
And do you have storage requirements then, Rodney, in terms of that you have to be fit to, we'll say, hold a certain percentage of your slurry, or how does that?
The requirement is like 400 and something days of your production, quite a bit of that depends on rainfall. You'd see, like, this spring was a wet spring. It looked like we were getting tight for storage when we started chopping silage this year. So it depends on rainfall. Remember, we'll also have evaporation in the summertime. We can see our ponds go down because it gets hot. So I think they're fairly sensible rules. It's all done by umbilical cover, so we're not on the road. We have to report if we ever have like a hose leaks or whatever. We have to report it and do a cleanup cost, and have the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources come out and check that and everything, and take photographs. And that doesn't happen very often, but we've had a few incidences. Yeah. So
okay. And then, from a farm business point of view, I suppose when you think of farm performance, I suppose, what are your kind of key farm performance indicators? What ones matter most to you? And why is that? I suppose we've seen all this growth, but that growth only comes from, obviously, good profitable dairy farming. So what are you actually looking for? What are you measuring?
So, yeah, I suppose the most important one to us has always been preg rate. If you can't make milk unless you have fresh calf cows, cheap milk comes from fresh calf cows. So you got to get cows pregnant, right?
Okay.
So very important that we have a very good preg rate. Cows become so expensive and so difficult, you've got to have a decent cull rate. So on the cow side, it's cull rate, it's preg rate, it's somatic cell count. That's a key indicator of how good the guys are doing their job at cleaning the stalls, cleaning the milking performance, how's people milking the cows. And on the cow side, death loss, obviously, where are we losing cows? Even cull rate is not just one number. It's what is the percentage of cows under 60 days in milk that are being culled? Are we letting old cows go that we can't get pregnant at 450 days in milk? That's fine because they're big money cows that needed to go. They've had 4 or 5 lactations. Or are we losing first calf heifers at 25 days in milk because somebody's not calving them right or not taking care of them? So analysing all that, that's constant. Dairy Comp, our system, we can print those reports, and I look at them every week, and our manager probably looks at them every day, right?
Yeah. And we might come back to some of them actually when we're talking about breeding and genetics, because I think they're important.
So that's on the cow side. On the financial side, our bank wants us to do monthly accrual accounting, right? Now, that sounds very, why is the bank after them every month? Well, that's just their policy, right? They had conditions of working with that bank. First of all, we had to use the accountants they told us to use, and we had to do monthly accrual accounting. And what that means is we are giving them a report every month of every animal on the farm, what bills are paid and who owes us money and what bills aren't paid. We're counting every bale of straw on the farm every month. We're counting what feeds in the bunks that has been paid for that isn't fed. Everything like that there. And it's a fairly straightforward process. David, my son, does part of it. I do part of it. Andy, our manager, does part of it. Everybody brings her results on the last day, the first day of the month or whatever, to Dorothy, and she does that report. And what that feeds into is one number at the bottom of the line, which is called our borrowing base number per cow. And that goes up or down every month. So we actually know, give or take, whether we made money or lost money that month. Because
on a monthly basis.
Yes, on a monthly basis. And it's too late when you get to your accountant and he says you've lost money at the last year, because you're 6 months into this year and you've been in a hole for 18 months. We want to know what's going on, and we want to obviously report that to the bank and make them aware of that, right? And then also they do a lot of benchmarking, you know. Uh,
Mm.
benchmarking process we're on is for 120 of the farms at Farm Credit Bank, which are over 1 million cows. So it's well over 10% of the cows in the US. Farm size, average farm size is actually very similar to our farm size. And
How important is that? Because that's something obviously we'll have farmers here completing a benchmarking process now over the coming weeks. Like how important is benchmarking in the process? You obviously have the monthly details from your own farm, but looking outside even your own farm and business, Rodney.
well, so it's important that you see that you're performing well, not just in general, right? And of course, they break it down by region, by farm size, by cow type, because remember, we're milking a lot of crossbreds. So they do a lot of energy corrected milk to that end. Uh, but it's also that why is our feed cost, 10% higher than average? Or why is our labor cost 10% higher than average? Are we being efficient in 7 or 8 of the different categories? Which one are we doing best and which one are we not doing best? And we do it with our 70 farms down in Kansas as well,
Mm.
who's doing what right, and it's all ranked every month in a league table. So those sort of things. I suppose you should really only benchmark against yourself, right? Because everyone is a little bit different way of putting their data in.
Mm.
But I find it useful that we're not falling out of line with the industry in certain aspects, and so do that. Um and then of course we're using our accountants. Accountants are great, but their goal is to make you look as bad as possible so you don't have to pay a pile of tax, right? And so we do our own monthly accrual accounting, which is really the bank accounting. We do our accounting through our accountant every quarterly. So, and
Mm.
then we've got historic data on that. We also use a financial consultant who does all our books. We actually have 3 sets of books that tell us the whole story, you know?
Mm. So
Uh,
you have your own management monthly stuff. You obviously then have your accountancy stuff, and then you have
yeah,
accountancy, which
and
is
the consultant also does some kind of benchmarking stuff. Yes,
okay.
group he's 30 something farms that he does financial consultancy for, and links with another group that is about the same size. So you get a lot of data back on that, and then we do budgeting through him. You know,
Mm.
now
Mm.
historically that has always been blown out of the water because Rodney has a very strange way of thinking of things and just doesn't fit the budgets. But it gives us an indicator of what we should and shouldn't do.
Okay. And come here, that's maybe leading into the next space, I suppose. Back home here, we've seen, I suppose, since August, really, milk price has been dropping off, and it come as a bit of a surprise to the industry, and it's dropped off significantly. Um, Talking to yourself, there seems to be obviously milk prices falling in the US as well, but the managing costs piece, I suppose, possibly, maybe we're naive to this. We think of an enclosed system. Um, Going to the US, we think high cost, and once we think sometimes this idea of high input, high output, sometimes the idea that costs don't matter or costs go out the window, or how important are costs? And can you give us maybe a bit of a feel for where is cost of production at? What's typical?
Yeah, that's a good good point. So let's break costs down into really there's 2 major costs on a farm as we break them down. Feed, right? Because we buy everything, even the crop we grow ourselves, right? We buy that. You know, it goes into our cost of our ration. So costs can be right now, costs are 50% of our total income, right? On feed. But those costs I can do nothing about, James.
Mm.
I have to feed my cows to their full genetic potential. I obviously can buy feed a little bit cheaper, but in those 100 farms at benchmark, the guy that buys it 4% cheaper than the guy that buys it the rest of us is probably that's all you're looking at. It's minimal, right? Uh, the costs that make the big difference in farming always has been where our success has been other costs. And other costs come into your repairs, your labor, your um, capital expenditure, your electricity use, your drug use, your staffing, all those things. And those are costs that you can control, right? You can have the guys do things better. You can have them be more efficient with pharmaceuticals, with breeding costs, with hoof trim costs by making sure that the cows aren't slipping and sliding. All those things can be controlled. Whereas feed and the milk price, I can do nothing about them. Why should I waste any time worrying about what price feed's going to be or what price milk's going to be, right? I have no control over those, but I have a lot of control over what I spend my other bits of money on. So, like typically, um, feed will be 50% of the cost of milk when it's at this kind of lower prices. It can be 40% when milk's at a decent price. Other costs can be 30% of your milk price, your income. So if you can find a way to save some of that, right? And some of it comes back to, hey, things are tough. Maybe that tractor just will have to not be changed right away. Maybe those tires can do another 2 months. Maybe we need to fix that door. But if the guys can patch a big board up the side of it, it'll do till we get a little bit of money back. So those sort of things. And then, of course, your third cost in that is usually your finance cost, your P&I, your interest, your payments, and so on and so forth. Again, pretty much beyond your control, right? You just have to pay to get. Yeah.
There was a group of us out in September, late September, early October with yourself, Rodney, and we you were bringing in the corn silage at the time, a pretty big pile of it. But you scared us a little bit in terms of what you were actually fit to buy high quality forage at. I think, did you tell me at the time something the equivalent of maybe 35 or 36 euros a ton delivered into your yard? So just where is the US maybe at the minute? We're all reading it, bumper kind of crops. What's it looking like? Where's your overall cost structure then as a result, Rodney?
As I understand it, and again, I'm no expert, James. You have four major buckets on earth of the major grains on earth. You've got wheat, you've got soy, you've got corn, and you've got rice. And it's very, very unusual that those four buckets are sitting full on earth, right? And they are, right? I've posted a few pictures there. There is corn, maize, still in the fields here, not combined, right? Because there's nowhere to put it. Right? The bins are full, the piles on the ground are full, and the guys have made the decision to leave it in the field because it'll sit out fine in the field all winter, right? Because we've no very low humidity all winter. Yes, you'll lose 5% or whatever, but it's a way of storing it, right? They'll combine it in April, right? And it'll be fine. So it sits there, right? Corn price today, of course, I'd have to do a little bit of calculation. I'd say it's under €100 a ton.
That's your maize meal as we'd know it over here.
Well, it is. Then there's a cost of grinding and trucking and stuff after that, but maybe 115 delivered on the farm, right? Soybean, my son buys contracts. He bought soybean at 250, and it was way too dear. I think you can buy soybean under 230 today, and I don't think we've ever seen it any cheaper in 20 years, So the soybean farmers are losing money. The corn farmers are losing money. Wheat, we don't grow a lot of wheat here, but I believe wheat. I was in England in November or in October, and the wheat guys are struggling over there too. It just hasn't been good, And so we've done, this can all change with the drought somewhere, right? And we'll be back to normal feed prices. So we've got some cheaper feeds for sure, yeah. And that's that, and the beef calf price is what's going to get us through this low milk price, hopefully.
So that's what we're all. I know the listeners on the other end of this we're all curious, wondering what the the US dairy farmers are going to do. So on one hand, milk prices is fallen, Rodney, but on the other hand, you have a lot of cheap feed. As you said, I think they're, cheapest it's maybe been in 20 years. So what are you going to do, I suppose, throughout this low milk price period?
Well, we obviously are going to go and look at the cows that are not profit centers any longer. It was very easy when our milk price was 20% higher, 25% higher, to justify milking that cow that was milking 15 liters of milk or whatever, right? She no longer is a profit center, so she'd probably go. Beef prices are very, very high. One thing the US hasn't got is it has a very low heifer supply for now, right? But we got addicted to selling these high-priced dairy beef crosses, and there is the lowest dairy supply in the US that there's been for 20 years, right? So there's a lot of cows on farms that will go. People will realize that probably the pain hasn't got real yet, right? But when the pain gets real, people will make those decisions, and you'll see cows go to town, and that'll be the first of the turn. And one day, I'm an optimist, James. One day we'll sell one cow too many, right? And the supply and demand curve will change, and we'll see prices starting to come back. It always works that way.
So that's where it's at, Rodney. It's really, as you say, it's looking at those other costs, and then it's looking at in terms of how many cows is on the farm, and at what point do we start moving more cows, voluntary culling as such.
Remember, it was very hard to sell that cow that was 2-3 months pregnant, that was doing less than 20 liters of milk for whatever reason, carrying a beef cross calf that was worth $1,200, $1,400, $1,500, right? Because there was a payday coming for her, in 5 months or 3 months or whatever, right? So she was kept for that reason, which I don't think historically she ever was kept on these farms. But there's a lot of those. I have some of those cows. I think if you add all the farms up, probably there's a lot of those cows that once they calve or whatever, they'll not be there anymore. So I think you'll see cow numbers come down. I think you'll see people making those decisions, maybe even though it's cheap feed, it doesn't pay to feed cows that aren't making money. But there's still expansion in the area industry as well. So,
does that mean you do sit on that feed? If you have cheap feed in the yard, it's we often hear the term it's money in the bank as such. So rather than feeding it out, as you say, to cows that aren't just rewarding you with a margin, you sit on it as such. Is that the case?
Yeah, that'll be our strategy. I imagine it'll be a common strategy, and then this is a global thing. It's New Zealand are hitting lower milk prices, Europe's hitting lower milk prices, US. So it's going to take some time to correct this.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. This has been a fascinating interview so far with Rodney into the running of his US dairy business. Join us next week for part 2, where Rodney discusses recruiting and managing staff, herd breeding objectives, animal performance and herd nutrition, while offering some insight into what he learned along the way and why he is so passionate today as he was 20 years ago about dairy farming. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm James Dunne, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.